When search teams finally opened the rusted storm cellar behind the farmhouse, the air that poured out was heavy, almost sour. Inside, two small chairs sat facing each other. Both were covered in dust except for the faintest outlines where someone had recently brushed them clean. And on the back wall, carved into the wood, was a single word, MOM, for the investigators who'd spent months searching for the missing Carter children. That single word changed everything, because it meant one thing: someone had been here, recently, and whoever it was wanted their mother to find it. If this story shook you, make sure to subscribe to Cold Case Secrets, where we uncover the truth behind the world's darkest mysteries. This story begins in Maple Hollow, Oregon, a quiet, heavily wooded community that feels more like a forgotten postcard than a place where tragedy can strike. Just a few thousand people live there, most of them families who've been around for generations. Everyone knows everyone, or at least they think they do. In early November of 2015, police received a call from Laura Carter, a mother of three. Her voice was calm, almost too calm as she explained that her two youngest children, Eli and Grace, hadn't returned from their grandparents' property across town. At first, no one panicked. Maple Hollow was the kind of place where kids still rode bikes after dark, and neighbors watched out for each other. But when the night passed, and there was still no sign of them, not at the grandparents' house, not on the trails, not anywhere, that calm began to crack. By the second morning, search parties fanned out through the thick pine forest that surrounded the Carter home. Helicopters circled, dogs were brought in, and Laura stood by the old white fence, clutching the only photo she had of her children together, taken just a week before they disappeared. Eli was 10. Grace was 8. Bright, curious kids who loved exploring the woods, collecting pine cones, and racing each other through the fields. They weren't the kind of kids who ran away. And that's what terrified everyone. The first hours of the search revealed almost nothing. The children's bikes were found near the dirt road, leading to the grandparents' property, abandoned in the grass. No struggle, no footprints, no tire marks. It was as if they'd simply vanished into the trees. The only clue came from a neighbor, Harriet Benson, who lived along that same dirt road. She told police she'd seen a dark SUV parked near the trail at around 5:30 p.m., about the same time Eli and Grace would have been heading home. But when investigators checked traffic cameras on the only highway leading out of town, no SUV matching that description was ever recorded leaving Maple Hollow. Detective Aaron Givens, the lead investigator, later said it was one of the most unsettling cases he'd ever worked, because every theory made sense until it didn't. If the kids were taken, why was there no sign of struggle? If they'd wandered off, why hadn't the dogs found any scent trail beyond a few yards from the bikes? And if it was a family dispute or something darker, why did Laura Carter seem genuinely broken, almost fragile, every time she spoke about her children? Within a week, the FBI became involved. The case began making national headlines. Small-town horror siblings vanished without a trace. The pressure on investigators grew, and so did the rumors. Some locals began whispering that the Carters' family history wasn't as perfect as it seemed, because behind the white picket fences of Maple Hollow, there were secrets, old ones. Laura Carter had grown up in Maple Hollow herself. She married young at 19 to Daniel Carter, a quiet, hard-working mechanic known for keeping to himself. The two built their life in a small farmhouse at the edge of town, surrounded by acres of forest once owned by Laura's late father. For years, they seemed like the perfect small-town family. But when Daniel died in a car accident in 2013, everything changed. Laura suddenly found herself raising 3 children alone: Hannah, 16, and the 2 younger ones, Eli and Grace. By the time the children disappeared, Hannah had just left for her first year of college in Portland. So when investigators asked who last saw the younger 2, the answer was simple: Laura herself. She told police she'd dropped Eli and Grace at her parents' house on a Saturday morning, so they could help their grandfather with yard work. She planned to pick them up by evening. But when she called later, her parents said the kids had already left for home hours earlier. That was the moment everything unraveled. Day 10 of the search brought new urgency. Local volunteers began combing through every abandoned structure and creek bed within a 10-mile radius. One group stumbled upon a strange find, a set of small footprints leading into a drainage tunnel by Route 16. They matched the approximate size of Grace's shoes. But the trail ended abruptly halfway through the tunnel, as if someone had been lifted out. When police traced the tunnel to where it resurfaced, it exited behind an old barn belonging to the Carters' property line land that hadn't been used since Daniel's death. Laura told investigators she rarely went out there. "It reminds me of him," she said softly. "I can't even look at it." So the detectives went themselves. Inside, the barn was mostly empty dust, broken boards, and old tools. But in the corner, beneath a sheet of corrugated metal, they found a small wooden box. Inside the box were a few faded photos. One of Daniel as a boy, another of a woman no one recognized. Tucked between them was a note, written in shaky handwriting. "It's happening again." Police couldn't tell when it was written. There were no fingerprints, no dates. But it was enough to suggest one thing. This disappearance wasn't random. Someone knew the Carters. Someone had been watching them for a long time. As national media swarmed Maple Hollow, the narrative began to shift. Some reporters speculated that the children had been abducted by a traveling worker who'd recently passed through town. Others whispered about something even darker, a family curse connected to an unsolved disappearance decades earlier. Because in 1989, two siblings, Abigail and Luke Marin, vanished from the same stretch of forest. Their mother at the time, Margaret Benson, the same woman who, years later, would become Laura Carter's mother-in-law. The coincidence chilled everyone. Two sets of siblings, same area, same vanishing act, and both families are connected by blood. When police revisited the Marin case files, they discovered that Daniel Carter, Laura's late husband, had been a foster child placed in the Marin household shortly after that first disappearance. He would have been 10 years old, the same age as Eli when he vanished. It was a discovery that sent shockwaves through the investigation, because suddenly, this wasn't just a modern mystery. It was a story repeating itself. By week 3, the search for Eli and Grace Carter had consumed Maple Hollow. Posters were everywhere, taped to gas station doors, nailed to telephone poles, fluttering in the rain. But as the community's energy began to fade, detectives kept circling back to one question. Why this family again? Detective Givens requested the old Marin file from county archives. The paper was yellowed, half-torn, and smelled faintly of mildew. Inside were grainy photos of Abigail and Luke Marin, smiling on the front porch of a farmhouse that looked eerily like the Carters' current home. The report said they disappeared on a summer afternoon in 1989, last seen, playing near the same forest line, where Eli and Grace's bikes were found. Back then, no suspects were charged. The community believed they'd been taken by a drifter. But one small note caught Givens' attention, a child witness who claimed to see a boy leading them away. The witness had been dismissed at the time. The description was vague. A boy about 10, it said. Daniel Carter had been 10. That fact hit Givens hard. If the boy in 1989 was Daniel, what had he been doing? And why had the Marins taken him in right after? He didn't tell Laura immediately. She was already unraveling, sleeping on the couch, jumping whenever the phone rang, convinced she could still hear Eli's laugh in the hallway. But when the detective finally brought her in to talk, she surprised him. She didn't cry. She just whispered, "I knew something like this would happen." As a child, Laura had been told never to go near the north field behind her parents' property. Her father said it was dangerous, full of hidden wells and unstable ground. But she remembered once sneaking there with Daniel, long before they were married. He'd gone pale at the sight of an old, sunken shack in the trees. He told her he'd lived there for a little while, alone. When she'd asked why, he'd said, "Because my mom made me." She'd never understood what that meant until now. Detective Givens arranged for a ground-penetrating radar sweep of the north field. The equipment picked up several anomalies beneath the soil, shallow disturbances, about 3 feet deep. When investigators dug, they found small wooden toys, half-rotted with age. One of them had a name carved crudely into it. Luke. The discovery reignited national attention. News vans lined the roads again. Drones hovered above the property. Theories exploded: online cult connections, generational trauma, even government experiments. But Laura wasn't watching the coverage. She was in her basement, sorting through Daniel's old storage boxes, trying to find anything that might explain who he really was. That's when she found the tapes. At the bottom of a sealed plastic bin were 5 unmarked cassette tapes. Daniel had always been nostalgic for old tech. He'd even kept a working player in his workshop. The first tape started with the click of a recorder, then static, and then a child's voice. Soft, trembling, whispering. She said, "They're not my real brother and sister, but she still makes me play the game." Laura froze. The voice was Daniel's. He couldn't have been older than 10. Each tape grew darker. He spoke about nights locked in a room with the other kids, about mother coming down from the stairs when they were bad. And then, on the last recording, a final line before the tape cut out. She said, "If I ever tell, they'll disappear too." Laura sat there in the dim basement light, shaking. The word mother wasn't referring to Margaret Benson, his foster mother. It was something else. Someone else. Armed with the tapes, police obtained a new warrant to re-examine the Marin property. The farmhouse had been sold decades earlier and now stood abandoned. Inside the attic, they discovered a trunk filled with children's clothing, none belonging to Daniel, Abigail, or Luke. On the lid, written in fading marker, were initials, EC and GC, Eli Carter, Grace Carter. The forensics team dated the marker ink. It was fresh, no more than a month old. That single piece of evidence shattered any hope that this was just history repeating itself by coincidence. Someone had staged the scene. Someone who knew about the old case and wanted Laura to see it. The FBI began to suspect that an unidentified caretaker, possibly Daniel's biological mother, had resurfaced. But when they traced Daniel's adoption files, they hit a wall. Every record prior to 1989 had been sealed under a false name. It was as if the boy had been born from thin air. By December, Maple Hollow wasn't the same quiet town anymore. Reporters camped outside grocery stores. Some neighbors avoided Laura entirely, afraid of being associated with the curse. Others brought food, candles, and prayers. At one town meeting, an elderly resident stood up and said, "This all started before any of us were born. That family's been marked." Detective Givens tried to steer focus back to evidence, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the entire town was part of something older, something they'd all quietly agreed not to discuss. When he pressed Margaret Benson, the foster mother now living in a nursing home, she barely spoke. Only once did she whisper. "He told me," he could hear them in the walls. She wouldn't say who them was. She just closed her eyes and started humming a lullaby. Christmas Eve, 2015. Snow blanketed the Carter property, muting the sound of the search helicopters overhead. Laura was alone. She'd refused to stay with family and said she needed to be home in case the kids came back. That night, she heard something a thud beneath the floorboards. She grabbed a flashlight and followed the sound to the hallway closet. Inside, beneath a loose panel, was a narrow wooden staircase she'd never seen before. It led into the storm cellar the one police had sealed weeks earlier, but this time the lock was broken. At the bottom, 2 small chairs faced each other, and carved into the wood behind them was that single word, M-O-M. Laura dropped to her knees. The carving was fresh flakes of wood still on the ground. For a moment, she thought maybe the kids had been here, alive. But then she saw something else, a small scrap of denim fabric, caught on a nail. Grace's jacket. Laura called the detective immediately. Within an hour, the cellar was filled with investigators, photographers, and evidence technicians. Yet what they found next confused everyone even more. Under the dirt floor were old concrete foundations, predating the house itself, remnants of a structure that once stood there decades earlier. When they dug around the foundation stones, they uncovered a sealed jar, inside of which was a single photograph, a black and white image of 3 children and a woman in a long dress. Written on the back were the words, "My angels are always under my house." The discovery reopened long-buried folklore about Maple Hollow stories of an isolated woman who lived deep in the woods during the 1930s and 40s. Locals called her Mother Gray, a recluse rumored to take in abandoned children. Some said she practiced spiritual rituals. Others claimed she simply sheltered the forgotten. But by the 1950s, the house was gone, torn down after a fire. And according to county land deeds, the property was later purchased by the Marin family. Everything, the land, the cellar, the disappearances traced back to that same spot. Detective Givens began to suspect that Daniel's biological mother might have been a descendant of Mother Gray. And if that was true, the dark family secret wasn't just metaphorical. It was buried literally in the ground Laura walked on every day. The more she learned, the more Laura felt the walls closing in. Every photograph, every document tied her husband to something she could no longer deny. A generational pattern of missing children connected to her own family line through marriage. She stopped answering the phone. She barely ate. Neighbors saw her wandering the property at night with a flashlight, whispering their names. On January 5th, 2016, she left a voicemail for Detective Givens. "I think I know who took them, but if I'm right, you won't believe me." By the time police reached her house the next morning, Laura was gone. The front door was open, snow blown halfway into the hallway. On the kitchen table lay a single photograph, the same one from the jar, and a note that read, "It's happening again. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe to Cold Case Secrets."